Guys, what's going on? I hope you guys are well. I hope you guys are staying safe. Guys, there was an interview, and I'm going to talk about two particular interviews where there's been a debate about Canelo and Ward, who would win in a fight. Kathy Duva said that she feels that Canelo is superhuman and Canelo would have beaten Andre Ward. She said that Ward was a great fighter, but she said like Ward left a lot on the table. Like Ward left the sport with, he was inactive a lot. We know that when he, voluntarily, as she pointed out, that he didn't do, he didn't have to be inactive like he was. I know that he was having a dispute with his promotional company, but she said that Canelo's just superhuman, and she thinks that he would have beaten Andre Ward. Obviously, a lot of people think otherwise. Some people think that Andre Ward would have beaten Canelo. But if we look at their run, Andre Ward's run at super middleweight, he had guys like Froch, Kessler, guys like that, Arthur Abraham. Like a lot of people make out like Andre Ward had a really hard run. I don't really think so. I think the super middleweight division was fairly weak. I think Abraham was a fairly average, Froch okay, Kessler okay, I don't really look at Ward's run out and think that wow, he destroyed all-time greats in that division. No, he fought okay some above average guys and beat them handily. But I don't really look at any of the guys that he beat as really, really top tier fighters. Do I think that he beat anybody on Canelo's level? No, he didn't. I think Canelo would have wiped the floor with every single guy that Ward beat at 168. Froch ain't beating Canelo. Kessler ain't beating Canelo. Arthur Abraham ain't beating Canelo. Any of the guys that Ward beat at 168 won't come close to beating this version of Canelo. Canelo would batter him and beat him up. And I'd even go as far as saying that I think Canelo could even stop Froch. I think Canelo would batter him so badly and beat him up. Because what you got to understand is that Froch wasn't fighting the guys of Canelo. So people say Froch has got an iron chin. Yeah, it's one thing having an iron chin against Andre Ward, who's not a puncher. And another thing having a granite chin against someone like Canelo, who's going to be vicious, who's going to be coming forward, who takes more chances, who has a better chin than Andre Ward. Who even has in a defense as good as Andre Ward and has a better chin, period. Ward has been dropped, hurt. Canelo hasn't. Throughout his whole career, he's never been dropped. Ward was dropped twice. And Canelo Alvarez has only been shook up when he was like 17. That was very early on in his career. But after that, he's fought Gennady Golovkin. And even Golovkin couldn't hurt him. So Canelo's proven that his chin is granite. And he would have dismantled everybody Andre Ward fought at 168. It doesn't matter what anybody says. That's just fact. He would have dismantled everybody. None of those guys that Andre Ward fought at 168 were top tier. And Canelo would have absolutely obliterated them, if I'm totally honest with you. Andre Ward was a technician. He was a great fighter. No doubt about it. But when Andre Ward met his match at 175, I think Andre Ward, as you could see, he was having a lot of trouble. I personally thought that Andre Ward lost the first fight. I even had Sergey Kovalev beating Andre Ward in the second fight until Andre Ward landed that shot. Hence why it showed that Andre Ward could be outboxed. Now, Kovalev was a great fighter. There's no doubt about it. Even when he fought Canelo, I thought he had a lot of success. But Canelo strategically broke Kovalev down. Something that Andre Ward did in the second fight, but he didn't do it as ruthlessly as Canelo did it. Now, I take it, Kovalev was slightly past his best when he fought Canelo, but I don't think he was in his prime when he fought Andre Ward the second time. I think that Kovalev was on the way out when he fought Andre Ward. I don't think he was at his best, but I still think that Canelo did a much better job in the way he absolutely broke and battered. Because for me, Andre Ward lost the first fight, and Andre Ward was losing the second fight. This is when Ray pointed out to me that Canelo was losing against Kovalev. Well, so was Andre Ward. I had Kovalev winning the first fight, and I had Kovalev winning the second fight up until he was stopped. And if I'm not mistaken, the judges also had Kovalev up, right, in the second fight up until he got stopped. So this is why Kovalev was a very good boxer. Had a very good jab. And if you can outbox Andre Ward, which he was, in my opinion, in both fights, right, and put Andre Ward down, hurt him, it shows that this guy was a really, really good fighter. Let's not forget Andre Ward was a gold medalist, and to outbox him wouldn't be easy. And Kovalev did it, for large parts of the first fight, and for me was winning up until the stoppage in the second fight. I had Kovalev winning the first fight, but that was the first time really Andre Ward fought somebody that I could consider a great fighter, and he really struggled with him both times. Let's be brutally honest, Ward struggled with him both times. And I agree with Kathy Duva in the sense that, there was a lot on the table for Andre Ward. There was a fights with Canelo at 168. There was fight with Stevenson, which I don't know whether Andre Ward would have won that fight, because Stevenson was a very big puncher. And as I pointed out, I feel like Andre Ward's chin, don't get me wrong, he didn't have a weak chin or nothing, but Andre Ward could be hurt, especially fighting these guys that were bigger, stronger, and someone like Stevenson, who was a puncher. Stevenson, for me, was a bigger puncher than Kovalev, one punch. He had the kind of power where if he hit you with that left hand, he could wipe you out. And I believe Andre Ward would have come unstuck against, I think he already did come unstuck against Sergey Kovalev. But I think he might have even come unstuck against Stevenson, and hence why Andre Ward left a lot on the table for me. And I think this is when I remember speaking to Ray in a live stream, and he said, "Well, Andre Ward's an all-time great," but then Ray, on the other hand, said Canelo Alvarez isn't an all-time great because of the composition, but who did Andre Ward fight, really? He never fought any great competition, really, when you think about it. Who did he fight? Froch isn't great. Neither is Kessler. Neither is Abraham. The only great fighter he fought was Kovalev, and they were barred with controversy. The first fight, for me, got beaten. So really, when you think about it, it's a bit like Canelo Golovkin, really. And when Canelo fought the same guy, Canelo only needed one go and he stopped him, So I don't really look at Ward's run at 168 and look at him, and you could make an argument that even if Canelo's not an all-time great, and Kathy Duva is right, by the way, that Canelo's done far more than Andre Ward. He's done far more than Andre Ward. He's achieved way more than Andre Ward. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it that Canelo is more accomplished than Andre Ward. I don't think anyone can argue with that. Canelo's fought better fighters. Canelo's gone up and down more weight classes. He's beaten more undefeated guys. Let's not forget when Andre Ward fought Carl Froch, he had already lost. Kessler had already lost. Andre Ward never fought undefeated guys like Canelo Alvarez did. So for me personally, and then Canelo moving up now, Canelo fighting Dmitry Bivol. And if he fights Beterbiev as well, Canelo would have surpassed Ward hands down. It's not even close. It's not even close. And by the way, I don't think Andre Ward would have beaten Arthur Beterbiev. I don't. I think Beterbiev would have dog walked Andre Ward. I think Andre Ward was, for me, like, great fighter. And I think he's special. But I do think that some people overrate Andre Ward a little bit. He never really fought top-tier competition. It's like, if you look at Andre Ward's competition, none of them would beat Arthur Beterbiev. I would even make a case, I don't even think Kovalev in his prime would have beaten Beterbiev. I think Beterbiev had the kind of power and the way he would dog walk Sergey Kovalev. I think Kovalev, and let's not forget Beterbiev is bigger than Kovalev. Yes, Kovalev is tall, but Beterbiev is bigger in stature and frame, and I think Beterbiev would beat Kovalev. I do. And I think that would also be a problem for Andre Ward, because Beterbiev would walk Andre Ward down, and Andre Ward isn't a big puncher, and that would make it a very horrible fight, and I think it would be a very, very and as I pointed out, that Andre Ward can be hurt, and Beterbiev has the kind of power to hurt him. Stevenson has the power to hurt Andre Ward. So I do think that there was many challenges out there for Andre Ward, which Andre Ward didn't stay around to accept. Which I think there were challenges that could have beaten him. I don't think he beats Stevenson. I think Beterbiev would have been a nightmare style for him. Like I said, I thought Kovalev beat him. And I think people always thought that Kovalev would beat Stevenson. I didn't. I think Stevenson had the kind of power to wipe Kovalev out with one punch. And I think Stevenson was a guy that probably didn't get the credit. But in his prime, Stevenson was a legitimate, I think he could have beaten anyone. And I think there were a lot of guys were avoiding him because of his punching power. I think Andre Ward was a great fighter at 168. I do question his run at 175 in the sense that, he beat Kovalev, and Kovalev was the guy at the time, but I thought Kovalev beat him the first time. Andre Ward beat him the second time fair and square, but I think there was other fights out there. Andre Ward was talking about there was no competition, there was nothing out there for him. I definitely think there was guys like Stevenson out there. I thought, a fight with Canelo at 168 at the time was being talked about. But Andre Ward decided to leave the sport. I think he kind of left the sport a bit premature for me. I think there was fights out there that, could have enhanced Andre Ward's legacy. Because really, when you look at Andre Ward, for me, the only great fighter he beat was Sergey Kovalev. And I think there was more. And listen, maybe Andre Ward beat Stevenson. Maybe he would have beaten Canelo as well. I think a lot of people would have favored him to beat Canelo due to size. But I think that may change. I think the perception of Andre Ward and Canelo right now is I think most people favor Andre Ward. However, I think if Canelo Alvarez beats Beterbiev and Bivol, I think that would change a lot of people. I think Canelo, I like Canelo's chances against Andre Ward. I do. I think Canelo was a very good inside fighter. I think Canelo had the power to hurt Andre Ward. I think Canelo's a better boxer than what people give him credit for. I think Canelo has a way better defense that people give him credit for. And I think it would have been a hard fight for Andre Ward. I do. I think Canelo would have been a nightmare matchup for Ward. But I think a lot of people, because of the fact that Ward was undefeated, because of the fact that Ward, never lost, he kind of left the sport with this kind of this aura of Andre Ward was unbeatable when he wasn't really. And Andre Ward could be beaten by the right guy in the ring with him. And I think Canelo would have had a great chance of beating Andre Ward. I think Canelo would have had a great chance because, like I said, for me, I even think I think Canelo was that version of Kovalev that fought Andre Ward the second time ain't beating Canelo Alvarez. The first version of Kovalev would have given Canelo a lot of trouble. But again, Canelo has power to really dent. Ward doesn't really have huge power. So Canelo has the kind of punch power to really dent you with one punch. And that could be the difference. And also Canelo has heavy hands that can slow you down. Hence what he did to Kovalev in the when they fought. Ward doesn't really have that. Ward doesn't really have power to really hurt you with one punch. He can break you down like he did with Kovalev, but I feel like Kovalev was kind of done when he fought Ward the second time. I don't think Kovalev had that thing, and I think Kovalev was done when he fought Canelo, hence why Canelo was easily able to break him down. And I think the reason why Kovalev had so much success in that fight, I think Kovalev fought a very cautious, scared type of fight where he was boxing from the outside and Canelo was just looking to break him down. But Kovalev wasn't engaging like he used to do in his prime. If you look at the Ward fight, Canelo or Kovalev Ward first, not one fight, Kovalev was kind of on top of Ward and he was being more aggressive. But in the Canelo fight, you would expect him, the fact that Canelo was a smaller man, to be more aggressive, but he was actually fighting a more scared, timid type fight against Canelo Alvarez. And that was because of the fact that I think he was worried that Canelo could hurt him. And that wasn't the Kovalev that I knew or once knew about. And that was because of the fact that Kovalev wasn't the same fighter physically or mentally. Afterward, the second fight, but I think the damage had been done already. I think the second time when he came out and fought Kovalev, when he fought Ward, Kovalev fought Ward, I don't think he was the same man. And that's why I think Ward was able to break him down so much easier and beat him up. Even though I thought, again, Kovalev was winning the second fight against Andre Ward. But I think Ward was always, I think that fight was always going to go in the favor of Ward, because I think Kovalev was kind of, there was rumors about his, lifestyle and stuff, bad habits, and I just felt like Ward would have broke him down in that fight. And I think Canelo did the same thing. It just took Canelo a bit longer, because Kovalev was doing a good job on boxing on the outside. But I think it was a matter of time with that fight. I think Canelo was always going to break him down. But in terms of Canelo and Andre Ward, I think Andre Ward was a bigger man. He was a strong guy. But again, I think Canelo has the kind of punching power that could hurt Ward. And that would be a big problem. And Canelo was a lot more sturdier than the second Kovalev fight that we saw. Canelo ain't going to get hurt by Ward. But I believe Canelo can hurt Andre Ward. And Canelo has great boxing skills, and he sets traps, and he's very good in landing shots. Ward is good, but I just don't think Ward has the power to hurt Canelo. And some people that say Ward stops Canelo is a joke. You're not going to stop Canelo. Nobody stops Canelo. And I personally would have, I just like the style matchup for Canelo. I think Canelo would have beat him, especially on the fact that I just think Canelo would have beat him, in my opinion. I like Canelo. I've always liked Canelo. And I think when Canelo fights Bivol and Beterbiev, I think most of the boxing fans would actually say that Canelo beats Andre Ward. I think right now, because Canelo hasn't really fought, anyone of that level, I think when he beats Bivol emphatically, and when he beats Beterbiev, I think everybody will change their opinion about how great Canelo was and is, in my opinion. And I've always thought that Canelo would have beaten Andre Ward. And I always said that I think if Andre Ward is going to pick, he was talking about fighting Joshua, I said maybe he should go and give a chance against Joshua, even though he has a better chance of probably beating Canelo. I felt like he would have lost both fights. I do. I felt like he would have lost to Canelo and he would have lost to Joshua. But I think the fight with Joshua would have been one where Ward might have got more credit for if he had gone and fought Joshua, because Joshua was so much a bigger man. And I also thought that, as crazy as this sounds, and the fact that Joshua's a heavyweight and he kind of has the power to probably knock Ward unconscious, Joshua is somebody that can be beaten more than Canelo can be beaten, if you see what I mean. I think Joshua is a lot more vulnerable, and I don't think he's as complete as someone like Canelo. But obviously the size disparity would have been so much where it would have been literally close to impossible for Ward winning that fight. I think Canelo, for me, is complete. I think he would have beaten Ward. I do. People may disagree, but I definitely feel like Canelo would have beat Ward. That's just my opinion. But leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Bernard Hopkins actually said that he thinks that Ward would have beat down Canelo Alvarez, which was a possibility as well. By no means am I writing Ward off. I think Ward has the capability of beating Canelo as well. And it wouldn't have shocked me if Ward had beaten Canelo. I just like the style matchup for Canelo Alvarez. But again, I think Ward was very, very good. I think Ward was very big. I think Ward would have given Canelo all sorts of trouble. But if we're talking prime, this version of Canelo, I think it was very hard. I think people go back to the Mayweather fight. That was a long time ago. That wasn't the same Canelo Alvarez to what we have today. I think Canelo right now, mentally and physically, is on another level. I don't ever think Ward was ever at the level that Canelo's at right now, physically or mentally. I don't. I think Canelo is as close to an unbeatable fighter as we're going to get now. I think he's just a monster. The way he's dispatching these guys so emphatically, Plant, Saunders, Smith, the way he did it, that was just impressive to me. But anyway, leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think that Andre Ward would have beaten Canelo Alvarez? Or do you think Canelo Alvarez would have beaten Andre Ward? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.